Week 9 of the fantasy football season. Here's a few kickers I looked at off the wire this week. The first kicker, Austin Seibert of the Washington Commanders. A very surprising Seibert's still out there in 57% of fantasy leagues. And this season, he's been one of the best kickers in all fantasy football. 5 weeks in a row with double-digit fantasy points is Seibert. So he's getting many opportunities. This Washington Commander team, believe it or not, one of the more high-scoring teams in all pro football. Even though last week they pulled it out on a crazy Hail Mary deflected ball to Noah Brown, 18-15. And this week, a good matchup at the New York Giants. As Seibert, he's getting 2 or 3 opportunities per game for decent distant field goals. And also, this Commander team scoring a decent amount of touchdowns as well. He's getting 2 or 3 extra points. So that's added up all season long. And Seibert, since he signed in week 2, every game's been a double-digit fantasy game for him, besides week 3 at Cincinnati. So right now, like I said, very surprising he's still out there in 57% of fantasy leagues. And weekly, at worst, he's a top 12 kicker. Next kicker, Chase McLaughlin of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So this Buck team, they're going to stall out a little more now without their top 2 weapons in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin over the next few weeks for Evans. With obviously Godwin out for the season, but Chase McLaughlin, he's been a solid kicker for the most part this season. I know the last couple of weeks, the numbers have dropped off a little bit where they were early in the season. Week 6 in New Orleans, 9 fantasy points. Week 7 versus Baltimore, 5. Week 8 versus Atlanta, 8. And Week 9 in Kansas City now. It's a good matchup where they know they got to put points on the board. Monday Night Football. And this Tampa Bay Buck team now has lost 3 out of 4 games. And this is going to be a tough one, obviously. 7-0 Kansas City Chiefs. So, like I said, McLaughlin's got a good boot. I know Arrowhead's a tough stadium to kick at. But Chase McLaughlin, for the most part, has been a solid kicker over the last couple seasons. And he's available in 58% of fantasy leagues. The next kicker, Jake Bates of the Detroit Lions. Lions, one of the best, if not the best offense in all pro football. And they're putting up monster points in the last 3 games for this Detroit team. 130 points in the last 3 weeks. So they're putting up a lot of points. They're putting up a lot of yards, even though it was a lot of special teams in last week's ball game. But Jake Bates, last 2 out of 3 games, double-digit fantasy points. Week 9, a little stiffer of a matchup at the Green Bay Packers, even though I think this Lion offense is matchup-proof, and Bates is going to get in position a lot most weeks, and he's available in tons of leagues at 65%. Week 6 at Dallas, 19 fantasy points. Week 7 at the Vikings, 8. And Week 8 versus Tennessee, 12 fantasy points. So like I said, 2 out of 3 double-digit fantasy points. 130 points for this Lion team in the last 3 weeks. And definitely a kicker there this week. The next kicker, Will Renchard of the Minnesota Vikings. So Renchard's had a great season kicking the football this year for this Minnesota Viking team. Still out there in 84% of fantasy leagues. And on the year, he's got 5 double-digit fantasy games out of 7 on the season. So week 9, a good matchup versus the Indianapolis Colts. Back home is this Minnesota team, and he's going to get field goal opportunities, and obviously indoors is always a plus for a kicker. Don't have to deal with the elements or anything, and pretty much the way you kick it, the way it's going to go. So Renchard, he's obviously mastered it this season, where he's hit all his field goals at home for this Viking team as a rookie. And the final kick I looked at off the wire is Brandon McManus of the Green Bay Packers. So McManus, he signed on a couple weeks ago and already 2 walk-off and game-winning field goals for this Green Bay Packer team for McManus. And now, if Jordan Love's going to miss time, more field goal opportunities, I believe, will be there for McManus. So last few years, it's been a struggle for him, no doubt about it, on the field, off the field for McManus, and now getting an opportunity with this Green Bay Packer team. And like I said, 2 walk-offs 2 weeks in a row. He's made the most of his opportunities, McManus. And we know a couple years ago, one of the best boots in all pro football, and he was putting up fantasy points, especially with the Denver Broncos out there in 91% of fantasy leagues. In the first 2 weeks, Week 7 versus Houston, 7 with the game-winning field goal, and Week 8 at Jacksonville with 12 fantasy points. And Week 9 in a potential shootout versus Detroit. And they know they got to put points on the board in Lambeau. I think McManus could be a decent ad this week. So that's a few kickers I looked at off the wire for Week 9 of the fantasy football season.